Howdy and welcome to this session from the Texas A&M School of Law Admissions Office. We wanted to bring you a 101 on applying to law school from our office. Typically, we meet with a lot of students and host sessions during the fall and spring semesters where we talk about a lot of these things. But with COVID this year, we will not be able to do those, at least at the moment. And so we wanted to put a resource out there on our website that you can have and use as you're beginning and working through your law school application process. So we hope this is helpful for you today. Before we jump in, I want to give some brief introductions for the two of us that are here today.
Howdy, my name is Natalia Cashin.
And I'm Jeff Green. The two of us are part of our JD admissions office here at the law school. We meet with a lot of students both on the phone and virtually and in person when those will begin happening again. Natalia and I have read thousands of applications and met with students over and over. And although a lot of you have very specific questions and unique circumstances, a lot of the baseline information is the same for students. And so we wanted to do this together to just give the information that we typically go over with a lot of students so that you have that baseline information. And then after you go through this and make those notes for you, we still want to offer those one-on-one meetings, but you having this information ahead of time will just allow us to jump into those more detailed questions quicker. And so let's jump in today. First, starting with LSAC. So this stands for the Law School Admission Council. This is the organization that you are going to apply through for all of your law school applications. If you've not heard of LSAC yet, you should start familiarizing yourself with them. They are the organization that administers the LSAT, the Law School Admission Test. And there's a number of things I want to point you towards with them just to get going. First is the CRS, the Candidate Referral Service. This is a service that you can sign up for where law schools can get to know you, can reach out to you, can access your information, where they can see that you're interested in law school and they can reach out to you to share information about themselves, but also it's a way that you might get information on application waivers or opportunities that law schools have for you to get to know them, whether it's events or whether they're coming to you or you coming to them. And so the CRS service can be a really good system for you to use. The next one is just so that you know is the CAS service, the Credential Assembly Service. This is part of the process, and we're going to get into the details of it a few slides down, but all of your documents are going to go to LSAC. They're going to basically verify them, and instead of you having to send your transcript or your resume or these things to a whole bunch of different schools, you're going to send everything to LSAC and use their system for them to send it out to the schools once you apply. But they also have a lot of other resources for you to use. They have checklists and timelines, blogs that they put out. That's just really good information that's going to cover some of the same things we do today. But because they are, the body that all of us work with, that all of the law schools partner with, they also have a lot of really good information. And so once again, if you've not been familiarized with LSAC yet, you should check them out. And then the last thing I'll say is that there are also a lot of other resources and consultants that are out there that are willing and ready to help you with law school. Some of them you will pay for, some of them are free. I just want to say that to vet those yourself first. If you're at a college at the moment, you should see if you have an advising office that does pre-law advising. If you graduate from college and aren't still there, a lot of times they'll still serve you. But that's an office that you can kind of vet those services through. There's a lot of them out there. And obviously their backgrounds and their personal experience in the law school realm and the years that they worked is one way to vet those. But there's just a lot of other resources out there. Some are very helpful, but also just, I want to encourage students not to just use the web and trust everything you see on the web for as you're preparing for law school.
So the only thing that I want to add is that we have an ability for you to apply to our law school through the GRE. And a lot of the times we get a question from applicants, I'm not taking the LSAT, so do I still have to register on LSAC? And you do. As Jeff mentioned, every application is going to come through LSAC and all of those documents are going to come through LSAC. So even if you might have to send us some other documents like the GRE exam through ETS, you will still have to make an account with LSAC. So that's probably your number one starting point for getting ready to apply to law schools, is creating your account on LSAC.
Great, that's a really great pathway. Segue to pathways, sorry.
So as I just briefly mentioned, we have these three main ways where you can apply to us. So I would say the majority of our applicants are going to apply through the LSAT. As we mentioned, that's something that you can sign up for during the beginning of your process on LSAC. A little bit later, Jeff's going to talk about when you should take the LSAT and medians and scores and things like that. But just know that every applicant will have to have some form of a test to be able to be admitted to law school, whether that's the LSAT or the GRE. A lot of times we get questions from applicants such as, what if I have a master's and a PhD and 7 billion other degrees? You still have to take either the LSAT or the GRE to be admitted. The only exception to that rule is going to be our Aggie Direct program. And that's a very, very narrow exception because it only applies to a subset of students that are currently at or have graduated within a year from Texas A&M and College Station. And if you want more information about that program, I would say that I would direct you to our website. We have a page directly on the website about that, and it goes through all of the requirements that we're looking for, but then also it directs you to email Dean Cook in our office, because if you think you might qualify, you're still going to have to connect with us, provide all the information that we're looking for, and then we can let you know whether you would be eligible or not. A lot of other law schools around the country have similar programs with their undergraduate institutions. So if you happen to not be an Aggie, that is something that you can look at for your institution and for that connected law school. But for us, that's going to be just that subset of students. So the majority of our students are going to take the LSAT or the GRE. Again, really the only difference there is how you're going to submit your reportable exam. The LSAT is going to come to us through LSAC once you have taken it and you have completed your writing sample. LSAC will submit those scores directly to us and we will get them all at the same time. If you take the GRE, you're going to have to go to our website, look at our GRE code, and then submit it through ETS to our specific school. I will say that a lot of times applicants will pick the wrong code. They will submit a code for College Station, Texas A&M, and not the law school. We have our own specific code. And so I would invite you to make sure that you check that out on our website under the GRE section to make sure you send it to the right location. And then we'll be able to receive that directly from ETS. And we will then have to request that LSAC release your CAS, which is that group of documents that Jeff discussed earlier.
Natalia, I just want to spend a few seconds talking about how to choose between the LSAT and the GRE. I think this is something that, once again, for the students that are out there, we might need to have this conversation, or you might want to have this conversation with us one-on-one. But in general, I feel like the default of the time we're going to recommend students to take the LSAT. Kind of my number one reason for that is if you don't take the LSAT, you are automatically limiting yourself on what schools you can apply to. But Natalia, what are some situations that you might recommend someone taking the GRE or using the GRE for their law school admission test?
Sure, that's a great question, because one of the differences between the LSAT and the GRE is the content of the exam. So the LSAT focuses heavily on your reading, your writing, your comprehension, and your analytical and logical thinking skills. The GRE has a math portion that the LSAT does not have, and students sometimes aren't aware of that. So that's the first thing, is sort of content is a little bit different. Second, I would say that the amount of times it's offered is another difference. The LSAT is offered less frequently than the GRE. The GRE is offered much more frequently throughout the month. And so sometimes students will pick and say, oh, I can take the GRE really soon, and so I'm going to sign up for that. But regardless of how often they are offered, they are both very difficult exams. And so you should allocate the correct amount of time for studying for both of them. And so really when we're looking at why you should use the GRE, most of our students fall into two categories. One, they've already taken a GRE because they maybe got their master's, or they were thinking about getting their master's and they're trying to decide between a master's program and law school. And so maybe you want to just take one test and then apply to both types of schools and see where you can get in. And then the second group is going to be sometimes our non-traditional students that have been working and that generally have a background in like engineering or finance, or things that lend themselves to doing really well on this type of exam. And so if you fit into those categories, the GRE might be a great option for you. If not, I would say, like Jeff said, the LSAT gives you more flexibility because all law schools accept the LSAT. Only some schools accept the GRE. And then the last thing that I will add about that is that if you have already taken the LSAT and you didn't do well, and you think, oh, I'm going to take the GRE instead and then utilize that score, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, the way that it does in your undergrad experience, where you could take, you know, the ACT and the SAT and then just submit your higher score. Because all law schools accept the LSAT, and that is the preferred and dominant exam that's used, we will receive through LSAC every LSAT exam that you take, every score that you've received. And so we will see that. And so even though you take the GRE and you want to be considered with the GRE, we will still have on file your LSAT score. And so that's just something that you have to consider before you make that decision to take the GRE.
Yeah, I like to tell students that you need to pick which one of these pathways you're going to choose and stick with it. And that even applies to Aggie Direct. If you're an undergrad A&M student and want to apply through the Aggie Direct method, if you go out and take an LSAT, you then will not be eligible necessarily for the Aggie Direct program. So picking now, early on in the cycle, now being relative to when you're watching this, but picking before you start the application process what pathway you're going to pursue, not just for A&M, but for whatever law school you're going to apply for, is important as you make those decisions and choices. So let's talk about timing. This is not a science necessarily, and a lot of people will have different dates that they give you. So the first thing I'm going to say about when to test is really impacted a lot about when you're going to apply. I like to tell starting with juniors in college or people that are a year and a half to 2 years out from applying to law school, if you can, to study for and take an LSAT that's either in the summer or early fall, the year before you would start law school, if that makes sense. And so if you're looking for applying for law school in 2021, that would be taking a summer 2020 or fall 2020, early fall 2020 LSAT. The reason of this is that a lot of students that are taking an LSAT aren't as happy with their score as they thought they would be. A lot of students test higher on their practice test than their first LSAT. And so there are some schools that will tell you a number of LSATs that they don't want you to take. I'm not going to really get into that here on how many LSATs to take, but what I like to tell students is that you should plan your year as you're preparing your application for law school. You should plan for the possibility of taking it a second time if you're not pleased with that first score. And so that means you need to think about what LSAT dates are out there for whatever year you're looking at, and circle 2 of those dates. I also don't like for students to take an LSAT back to back, whether it's a September, October, or June, July. I like for you to have some time in between to study, maybe try a different plan or try a different course of study for that LSAT. But you need to look at the LSAT national dates that are out there for whatever year you're applying, and create a plan for when you're going to take those. Because it's not just about when you're going to take them and how that affects your application, but you need to think about what's going on in your life around those tests. I've talked to so many students who were college athletes and had a national final the day before or day after the LSAT, or someone that had a wedding or a family event right around their LSAT date. And almost always those stories are coupled with not being pleased with their scores just because of the stress. And so thinking about when to test and being strategic with when you test, is a really good starting point to planning out kind of your law school application season. And so as that applies to when to apply, the first thing you need to do is any schools that you're interested in, you should get out there, whether it's on LSAC or whether it's on the law school's admission pages, and research for what deadlines they have published. Some schools are going to have formal deadlines published. Some are going to have some informal deadlines published, but you need to be aware of some of those and take those into consideration. And so for this year, for the fall of 2021 applications, you're going to see a final application deadline of May 31. Neither Natalia nor I are going to recommend you to wait and apply in May. We highly recommend you to apply much earlier than that, and really to be a early application, if that's one of your goals. You should really plan on applying before the holidays. And so I like to tell people to apply before Thanksgiving. The majority of law school applications come in the months of January and February. And even if you're applying in January, a lot of people would still say that you're on the first half of applications, but there's just a lot of applications that come in those seasons, and a lot of law school offices, both the professional staff as well as faculty committee members, are very busy with reviewing files. Applying earlier does not necessarily mean you're going to get an earlier offer at any specific school, but it often does mean you might get more chances to get noticed and more chances for your application to be known by the committee. And so the main recommendation I have for you is that you need to research your dates and look at the cycle and maybe talk to different individual counselors at each of your different schools. And you need to set a date for yourself of when to apply. Don't wait till those final deadline dates for those schools, but look at the whole calendar, consider when you're going to take the LSAT test or the GRE or whatever test you're going to apply for with those schools, and set a deadline for yourself that's reasonable, but that's also going to give yourself a competitive edge. Every year, Natalia and I talk with students who weren't able to receive an admission offer, and they ask us, what can I do differently? And most of the time, part of that conversation just has to do with you just applied too late, and applications just really start to pile up in those January and February months. And if you're applying in March and April, which is still before that final deadline for a lot of schools, you're just competing with a lot of students for what's typically a few seats remaining at the time.
So I think what are great takeaways from what Jeff just said, the first is kind of a more specific view of something. It's that, when it comes to how many LSATs to take, it's important to know that law schools have different rules regarding how they consider your LSAT scores. For us, we will take your highest score. So when I say that, sometimes students then hear, oh, okay, I can take it as many times as I want, and they'll just take the best score. While we take the best score, we can see all of the scores that you are going to submit to us. And so if there are any trends that are concerning, like you got a really great score, but then the next couple of tests you got lower scores, we're going to be concerned about that, right? Or if you took it a bunch of times and got lower scores and then you got a high score, that's good. It looks like maybe you've taken the time to study. So these are all things that go back to strategy. I think a lot of what Jeff was talking about is really be thoughtful about the strategy that you're going to put in place with how to study, when to select your test, to have a backup test, to look at deadlines, to try to submit as early as you can, and that puts you in the best position. A kind of more macro view of what I think a takeaway is that anything that we mention or anything any other school mentions about when it's best to do something, that's just best practice. And best is going to be different for each applicant. So if you're listening to this now and you're a sophomore or a junior and you're able to do all the things that we're talking about, that's great because you have all this time to schedule things out and kind of set out a perfect plan, right, to get everything submitted in time and to get your best score. Most of the time, I would say people that are listening to this are midway through the cycle, right? Like our application already opened. And so some of you might have already either taken your test or you're about to take your test. And so just remember that you need to take these things in context of your experience. So if you are kind of in the middle of your process, then you don't need to apply early just to apply early. You need to apply as early as you can with your best score, because those things are tied to each other. And if you apply early with a terrible score, it doesn't really matter that you applied early. And so be thoughtful about when you're getting this general advice to make sure that you internalize it and apply it to your own circumstances, and not just make hard and fast rules about, okay, if I apply early, I'll get in. Because that's not really what we're saying. We're just saying organize yourself so that you can apply as early as possible and don't wait till the last minute.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Natalia.
All right, so part of being able to apply early is having all of your documents together. And again, I think a lot of these things need to be put together well before an application opens. But these are, there's a lot of different parts of the application, and Jeff and I are gonna walk through them and give you a lot of feedback about specifically what we like to see in these different sections of your application. But broadly, as a bird's eye view, there are two parts to your application. One is going to be what we call the EAP, which is your electronic application, and that's going to be submitted through LSAC, and it's going to include the application form that will be unique to each law school. So in your LSAC portal, you will see that each law school that you choose to apply to will have an application form. They're similar, but there are definitely differences, and especially in the instructions that they have for the remaining documents. Within that same EAP, we will receive your personal statement that you will upload, your resume, and any addendums. Separate to that is the CAS report. That is a report which you will pay for the service that LSAC will put together the documents that you see below that. A report summary, your writing sample, all of your transcripts, and letters of recommendation. And so while they're all submitted through LSAC, they fall into those two categories, and they are submitted to us they could be at different times. So you could complete all of your EAP documents before you get your LSAT score. And so you can go ahead and submit all of that to us. And then once you get your LSAT score, LSAC will then submit the CAS to us. That's kind of a neat trick that when I was applying to law school, I didn't know. I thought I had to have every single thing together before I submitted my application. But now it's really great to know that you can have everything ready to go, and the only thing that might be missing is your LSAT score and your writing sample. And you can go ahead and submit it. We can receive it. We can see that you're on top of everything. And then once those scores are released and the writing sample is done, we can receive your full application. At that point is when we will review it. And so it is helpful to get everything submitted so you can be organized, but know that until we get your full CAS and your full EAP, we won't be able to go in to review and then make a decision.
Yeah, the one thing I'm just going to add that you said, but I want to highlight, we have a lot of students that wait till they get their LSAT score back before they apply, and they think that that has to be done as well. We can actually see that you're registered for an LSAT or that you've taken one and are waiting on a score once you apply. So once you're connected to our school as an applicant, we can see that. As well, if you've tested, you have a score, you want to start your application process, but you want to test again, if you are registered for a second LSAT, you can go ahead and apply. And this is specific to how schools process their files. But how we work is that even if we have all of these documents that are required and we have a complete LSAT test, if we see another registration for another LSAT, we're going to wait before reviewing your file till we get that second or final LSAT test.
Perfect. So we are now going to go into some detail about each of these documents that we're going to need from you. I think this is probably one of the most important parts of the information session that we're doing today. A lot of students have a difficulty in keeping track of all of the nuances between law schools. And on our end, that makes an applicant look disorganized and like they maybe don't have attention to detail. And that's a very important quality in a law student and then future lawyer. And so I would break out your notebook and your pen and take down some notes about this, because this is going to be, I think, really important for you as you're going through your application, especially to our law school. So the first document is the application form. As I mentioned, this is something that is specific to our law school, and while it looks similar to a lot of the other law schools that you'll be applying to, there are a couple of things that are going to be different. As you're filling stuff out, make sure that you are taking time to review your selections. Because you're doing everything online, students sometimes make errors because they skip through to the next section and didn't see how the previous section saved. So make sure that you take your time when you're going through each section. I think the main part about the application form is that you're going to answer some questions in a section called character and fitness. And that section is something that is important to us as a law school, because we're looking to admit students that have high quality character and mental fitness. But also it's something that is required of us by the state. So each state is going to set up their character and fitness determinations for whether or not you are eligible to sit for the bar exam and become a licensed attorney. And so the point of us adding it to our application is that we need to determine whether or not you are likely to be allowed to sit for a bar exam at the end of your 3 years, because it would be kind of silly to let you go through law school and then not be able to take the bar exam. If you choose not to take the bar exam, that's your decision, but we want to make sure you at least have that option. And so when you're going through, I would say in the application, that's one of the most important parts, because you're going to have to look through several categories of character and fitness. Some apply to your criminal record. There's specific language about things that are expunged, things that happened when you were a juvenile. We don't really need to see speeding tickets, but the main advice that we give students about character and fitness is to try and disclose as much as you can, so that we have an accurate representation of your history, and then make a determination based off of that. The reason we're asking for more rather than less is not so much so that we can judge your character and fitness, because a lot of times that's not really the goal of assessing that. It's really just to make sure that what you have on your application then matches when you create your intent to sit for the bar, because those things do have to match. Your state bar is going to request a copy of your application, and anything that you forgot to mention in your application is going to cause issues for you sitting for the bar, and it could potentially cause issues for you as a student, because there are scenarios in which we will have to maybe decipher whether or not we will revoke admission based on things that you left off of your application. So again, the goal is to put in as much as possible. The last thing I'll say about the application form is that this is how we gather your information for contacting you. And so making sure that your email address is correct and it's the one you really check, not just your school email, and that your phone number is on there, and that you have the opportunity to select whether or not you would like to be text messaged by us. Those are really important, because as soon as you apply and as soon as we start reaching out to applicants and students that we want to consider admitting, that is where we're going to pull that information for you.
Yeah, and along with that, where you're living. And so this happens a lot for current college students that are moving every year, getting different leases. And so I would just consider what addresses you're listing. You have opportunities to list a current, a permanent. And so I would just make sure, I think this is obvious, but that permanent address is something that you can kind of count on. And then if you do change locations, obviously to update your schools with that information. All right, so we're going to jump into personal statements now. We could spend an entire presentation on this if we wanted to. There's a lot that can be discussed about personal statements. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it today, because the goal of this is to cover a broader range. So the first thing I'm going to say is that I don't think you have to wait till the end to start your personal statement. But one thing I like to tell students is that all of these different pieces of the application process and these documents tell a school different details about you and different aspects about who you are, as a person, as a student, as a professional. And so a lot of students struggle with, where do I start my personal statement? And some schools will tell you where to start. Some schools will have a more specific prompt that they want you to write on. A lot of schools like us have a broader, pretty wide open prompt that we just want a personal statement. So the first thing I'll say is, make sure you know what those rules are. We require a two-page double-spaced personal statement. If you cannot follow those instructions, that can become an issue for you. But where to start in a personal statement is a pretty challenging question for a lot of students. And so I like to tell students to actually start with considering, what does everything else tell us about you? And is there anything lacking? Or is there anything that needs to be highlighted more, or explained more? And so that's just a very general spot that I like to tell students to start is, I don't like to read a personal statement that just gives me a history of what courses you took in college, because we receive a document called your transcript that tells us that. Some students might just give us a professional story of themselves, and although it'll definitely have more details than your resume tells us a lot of that. And so what is it that we don't know about you that could be helpful for us to learn? And so you've got to come up with what you want to communicate. A couple of errors that I see some students make is trying to communicate too much. We read a lot of personal statements, we read a lot of applications. We don't typically just read one a day. And so your personal statement is not something that we're going to meditate over, if you will. We're going to take a few minutes to read it in its entirety, and then move on to that next document with whatever order that reviewer is going in. And so I see a lot of students that try to communicate too many things. And what happens is then the takeaway is just kind of a blur. It's hard to remember what was that one thing that landed, or what was that one thing about that student that stood out. And so I would my recommendation for students is to try to come up with just one or two things that they want to communicate about themselves that will portray them as the potential to be a successful lawyer or a successful student, or why you might add value to that law school that you're applying to. And then one trick I like to tell students to use is that obviously you should use friends and family, advisors, counselors for helping you edit all of your materials and review all your materials. So your personal statement should be very well written, and should have no errors. Let me put it that way. But also have someone read it for its impact. And so what I like to tell people to do is for you to give your personal statement to someone for 60 seconds, 90 seconds, and then take it away from them. Don't tell them you're doing this, but then change the subject, talk about something else, take them to coffee and talk about something else. And then 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, ask them, what do you remember about my personal statement? And if it wasn't that point that you wanted, if it wasn't that main idea that you wanted to land, if that didn't land with them, then you probably need to make some adjustments so that what you were wanting to communicate is clear. I think a lot of students are searching for that perfect story to tell. And although we've read a lot of stories, and I've had personal statements that have brought me to tears and have been really impactful, a lot of times I feel like students are overreaching, and a story becomes, even if it's a great story, it's not well written and it's not communicated well. And you have to remember that we are reviewing you to become law students and lawyers that need to be able to read and write well and to communicate well. And so how it's written, both in its details and in its grammar, as well as how it communicates, needs to be written well and written clearly.
I think this is a perfect time to give an example of resources. Jeff talked about resources a little bit earlier, people you can lean on to help you with this. And then, earlier in the PowerPoint, we talked about consultants and things like that. One of the resources that I think I often hear this from students is that, they were on Reddit or they were on some blog and they read that, the best personal statements are the ones that have, this really moving story or this light bulb moment of when they decided they wanted to be a lawyer. And the truth of the matter is that for, I would say, 80% of our applicants, that's not how it happens. You don't have to have this crazy experience that then led you to law. It's perfectly okay for you to have decided that you're good at writing and reading and you want to become a lawyer. And so the goal is take that pressure off of yourself. Don't think that we are sitting here to read the next, a John Grisham novel in 2 pages, because that's not what we're looking for. We just really want to see a clear explanation of why you want to come to our school and why you maybe want to be a lawyer. And so if you're able to do that, that's all we're looking for. So I think, I wish I had known that when I was applying to law school, that it didn't have to be this novel or kind of this written statement that reached this crazy peak of interesting, facts that led me to go to law school. It just had to be a very clear, concise, and direct statement regarding whatever topic you choose. And the point of that is that that's the way you're going to write as a lawyer. So your client isn't going to want to sit there and listen to a whole buildup of whether or not they're going to be able to maybe be released from jail, right? They just want to know, will I be able to, and how is that possible, and when will it happen? And so that is an important first test of your writing skills and your ability to communicate effectively. And so that's really what we're taking from when we're looking at that personal statement. So think about that as you're considering your topic, or that 1 or 2 things that Jeff was talking about.
And sorry, the last thing I'll say is almost everyone that reads your personal statement that's reviewing your application is an attorney, has practiced law. I'm the exception here. I'm one of the exceptions, but almost everyone is an attorney. And so they see the errors very easily, and we see the errors very easily. And so it just comes back to work very hard on this document, work very hard on all of these documents to make sure they're clean and organized.
So the next document is the resume. I love talking about this because I used to work in career services, so I've seen my fair share of resumes. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that while it is a great idea to go to your career services office at your undergrad institution, or reach out to somebody, even if you've already graduated, you could probably reach back out to your undergrad institution to use their career services office to create your resume. That's great, but know that we are not limiting your resume to 1 page. This is kind of the exception to that resume rule. And the reason we don't limit it is because, as Jeff mentioned earlier, each part of your application is going to tell us information about you. And the resume is a great place to show us all of your experiences. And some of you are non-traditional students that have had, 10 to 15 years of work experience, and a 1-page resume, it's just really not going to allow us to see the depth and breadth of your experience. And so you can absolutely go past the 1 page. If you're going to do that, make sure that the information you're providing is relevant and written in such a way where we can, glance through it and pick up on the most important elements of each of your experiences. And if you feel like you can only fit on 1 page, that's okay. It's just important for you to give us some details behind things that you have accomplished. So the example I generally give is, if you list on your resume that you've received a scholarship, and all that you put on there is, received the Texas Aggie Bar Association scholarship, I don't really know why you received that scholarship or what was the purpose of that scholarship. So a great way to expand on that in your resume would be to list out that scholarship, and then below give us a bullet point of why you received it. Maybe you received it because you kept a 4.0 through all 4 years of college while you were working. That's something that really gives us a view into your work ethic, your ability to organize your time, to be committed to multiple things at one time. And so I think those are the things we're looking for in the resume, is a clear description of why the things that you have done and experiences that you've had, why are they relevant to us, and how do they make you who you are? So don't spend too much time stressing about that, but do make sure that it's organized, it has a good structure, and that it has relevant information for us to review.
Yeah, I don't know what to call it, like the 10-foot test. Like if you can print out your resume and have someone look at it from 10 feet away and they know it's unorganized from that distance, those stand out, and we get those too often, unfortunately. And so I think just the organization of it, the details are obviously important, but also just the style of it needs to be clean and organized. And some students don't do enough formatting and conditioning of their resume. Some students do way too much. And so consider what it looks like in summary as well as in detail. So Natalia started to talk about addendums earlier when it came to the character and fitness section of the application form. And so you can use addendums you will use addendums to explain more details if you have an affirmative answer on the character and fitness portion of any law school application form. But addendums are used for a broad range of reasons. And so I guess to define it more simply is addendums can be used for students to add information that needs to be added. And so sometimes we will see character and fitness addendums for students that need to give that additional information. We're looking for the who, what, when, where, why, and result. But it's not just a bullet point either. A lot of times we're wanting to know how did it impact you? What was your result as a person after that event, or after that season you went through? But other addendums that we might see are GPA addendums. If it is not obvious that your GPA is poor because of a certain situation but got better, or even if it is obvious, that's a good opportunity for you to highlight that. Once again, we are going to get your transcripts and we're going to be able to see those trends. But if you just had a really bad freshman year and worked really hard from there, and you're just not pleased with where your GPA is at, because you know that although the overall cumulative GPA is being reported as a 3.0, but you know that your last 2 years were actually above a 3.75. Explaining those events around it in an addendum can be helpful for you. An addendum that can be really helpful for students is a diversity statement, explaining about your background or your culture that you're proud of and how you identify well with that, or want to serve a certain population, a certain people, whether you're wanting to do that within the practice of law or outside the practice of law. Diversity statements can be used in an addendum that can be really helpful to understand more about you. The one thing I'll say is that I've seen students use addendums to basically just give a second personal statement. I saw one labeled this last year as personal statement number 2 that was just uploaded as an addendum. And don't abuse addendums, because we can also see that happen as well. But use an addendum when you need to explain something more about yourself that you don't think has been explained with the other application documents.
One of the other addendums that we allow that is kind of unique to us and gives you an ability to be strategic about how you're going to apply to law schools, especially if you're applying to multiple law schools, is the Why Texas A&M addendum. And so as you create your documents, you'll see that you'll upload them on LSAC and then you can attach them to different applications. And so a lot of times students will create a personal statement that is not specific to a school. And then we'll use that same personal statement throughout the different schools that they're applying to. This is a great strategy because then you won't accidentally send us maybe a competing law school's name in your personal statement, which is never great, right? I never really want to read, my number one choice of law school is such and such law school, but it's not Texas A&M, because then it makes it really easiest for us to say, okay, well, then I guess we won't admit you, right? But again, it goes back to that attention to detail. So if you're going to write a name of a law school in a personal statement, make sure you label it when you upload it and make sure you put it to the right place. But if you don't do that and you do a broad personal statement that can, be applied to all the different law schools, you do have the option to submit a Why Texas A&M addendum that lets us know what it is about Texas A&M that you're so interested in. And this can be a lot of things. If you've taken advantage of, meeting with us or meeting with a faculty member or listening to a webinar or any of the virtual events that we're offering throughout the application cycle, those are things you can mention in your Why Texas A&M addendum. And we love, knowing why students are choosing us, because then it gives us another way to be able to assess, whether you'd be a great addition to the law school and what you would be bringing to the table. And so, as Jeff mentioned, when you can use these addendums to provide relevant, not mentioned before information, you are doing a great job with addendums. When you write addendums that are information that we already have, or it's, you know, just repeating it yourself or things like that, all that you're doing is creating more work for the person making the decision to allow you to be admitted, right? So be thoughtful about how you choose to represent yourself and the amount of time you're going to have us spend on your documents. And then the one quick thing I wanted to say about the diversity statement is that we define diversity when it comes to that statement really broadly. And so it's not narrowly tailored just to, you know, racial, ethnic, gender diversity, but it can be anything. We have students that write topics about their experience within the military, and we have students that talk about, you know, maybe they lived in different places all over the country. I mean, whatever, you're a non-traditional student, whatever it is that you think is going to help you bring a diverse viewpoint to the law school can qualify as part of that diversity statement. So just know that it's not narrowly tailored, and if you have some sort of unique situation, we would love to read about it.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to jump into that second part, the CAS report. And as I mentioned, again, this is important because it's going to have your LSAT score. If you did take the GRE and not the LSAT, until we get your GRE score, we can't ask LSAC to release your CAS. So no matter which way you apply, that CAS is going to be really important. The CAS is a great way for us because it gives us this report summary, the first document, which is a document that LSAC creates that gives us a view, a snapshot into all of your you know, basically the summary of your transcripts. So we can see what your grade point average was in each semester. We can see a listing of, you know, how many A's, B's, C's, D's, F's that you got throughout your time. It gives you a percentage of where you ranked in your college, if that's information that's available. So it's this really great tool that we can use to see, you know, where you went to school, how you did in those schools, what your degree was, and how that degree, you know, stacks up with other degrees at your school. And so just know that submitting your transcripts for every school that you've attended is very important because we need all of that information, and it just allows us to really get a good view of what your college, and, you know, if you have masters or PhDs or things like that, that's where we're going to be able to see all of the numbers for that. The one part of the report summary that I think maybe is some students don't know about, Jeff mentioned it earlier, it's going to be that LSAC is going to analyze all of your transcripts in a way that they do it across the board for all law schools. So if you're interested in how that works, you can actually look on their website, and they go through their standardized process for, you know, looking at transcripts. And the result of that is that they create a cumulative GPA. So we can see your degree GPA on that same report, but the GPA that's reported for purposes to the ABA and for law school medians and all of that is going to be your cumulative GPA. And so it's just important for you to make sure that you know maybe what your cumulative GPA is when you're looking at where you should be applying to law school.
There's a lot of students that get frustrated when they maybe they realize or not that your cumulative GPA that gets reported is almost always going to be different than what's on your transcript at your school that you're currently attending. So that catches a lot of students off guard. One of the next things that we're going to receive in the CAS report is your writing sample. If it is available at the time when we receive this. Sometimes we do receive it after we receive the CAS report, depending on when you submitted your writing sample for the LSAT. I'm not going to get into a whole lot about the writing sample itself, other than it is for the 2020-2021 year. This is a required step before we will be able to get a CAS report. This prior year it was not, although we still as a school required you to submit it to us before we would review your application. And so the writing sample has now been removed from the LSAT test on the day of, but you will need to make sure that you set aside time to complete the writing sample portion. And so going back to that timeline and that you thinking through the calendar, make sure you're considering your writing sample and when you're going to submit it. But it does get submitted to us, and we do read that as part of our review of your total application.
So the next document are our transcripts, and I already, briefly mentioned why it's important for you to be able to submit all of your transcripts, because we're able to see, all of your progression during your time in school. It's important for you to know that any school that you've attended where the grades that you've received are then part of your degree, we have to have all those transcripts. And it's important, I don't think a lot of students do this, but it's important for you to review your own transcripts when you submit them to us, because there are notes on your transcript that will sometimes let you know that you were maybe on academic probation, if you fell below a certain grade point average during your time in school. Some schools don't notify students when they're on probation. It just gets added to the transcript. And so back to that character and fitness question, the first question is about your academic standing. And so sometimes students will put no for that question. They don't have, any of those issues, but then we'll look through the transcripts and find that you actually were on probation. So a way to be really organized and prepared and have a complete application is to make sure you look at those transcripts, see if you were on probation. If you were, answer the character and fitness section correctly, and submit that addendum that says, during this semester, I was on academic probation because I fell below this GPA. The following semester, I increased my GPA and was the academic probation was lifted. And so that's one of those things. The other thing is if you have kind of a, financial hold or anything like that on your transcript, it'll show, and we're not able to move forward with your decision if you have that on there. So you'll have to take care of that. And then the last thing on that is just if you have any kind of academic sanction that's not related to grades, but for any kind of behavior. So situations, in dorm rooms with RAs or Title IX or any of that, those are also things that you're gonna have to submit to us. And so the takeaway from for transcripts is make sure that you get all of your transcripts submitted to us and that you review them and provide any additional information that we may need off of those.
And last is letter of recommendations. It's not just what we're talking about last, but a lot of times it's actually what is reviewed last. Admission counselors, staff members, faculty members on an admissions committee have different preferences on how they review. But we, as Natalia pointed out earlier, we get these documents in these two clusters. The EAP documents come together in one PDF, and the CAS report documents come together in one PDF. And so if someone's reading, whether they're reading the EAP first or the CAS report first, the letters of recommendation are at the end of your CAS report. I think, first off, you need to research what is required of your individual schools you're applying to. We require 2 and allow up to 3 letters of recommendation. So we require 2, but you can submit a 3rd if you choose to. I think some students, I know some students, wait too late on asking their recommenders to write a letter of recommendation. And then 2, just don't take this step important enough. What someone else says about you is a really helpful insight for us to review you as an applicant. And I say that positively, but if it's someone that doesn't know you well, then we're not going to learn much about you. And it's not going to be much of an advantage to you in this step of these recommendation letters. And so the first part is, when are you going to ask the individuals? Going back to when are you going to apply, you need to give your recommenders ample time to write your recommendation letter, to get it sent off to LSAC, and for LSAC to get it uploaded into your system. And so if you're wanting to apply by, the first of a month, and you only ask that person a month prior, say you give them 30 days, and you think 30 days is plenty of time to write a letter, I can almost guarantee you that your letter of recommendation will not be in your portal on time. They might write it in those 30 days, but between them sending it to LSAC and getting it uploaded, it just seems to be that letters of recommendation are often the document that students are waiting on before they can be a complete applicant, before we can get their CAS report. And so take into consideration the timeline of when you're requesting your recommenders to write a letter on your behalf. similar to what I talked about in the personal statement, consider what we know about you with the other documents, and allow that to help you in thinking about who you want to choose to write your letters of recommendation. A couple rules of thumb I like to go by is that if you are coming straight out of college into law school, if you need to have a letter of recommendation from an academic member, a faculty or professor member, preferably. If you're coming straight out of college and into law school and you don't have a letter of recommendation from a professor, someone that's taught you, it might actually create questions for us of why not. If all of your letters of recommendation are professional, it's going to tell us that you have some good experience, and hopefully those are really positive letters, but it might leave a committee member wondering, why is there not an academic reference in here for a student so that we can learn about how the student did in the classroom? On the other hand, if you are a non-traditional student, if you've been at a college for 2, 3, or more years, and you don't, and all of your letters of recommendation are academic, but you don't have any professional, it can create the same type of questions. And so consider yourself, spend some time self-reflecting on who you are and what you bring to the table as far as a competitive law school student goes, and consider what we need to know about you that we don't yet. But then also, you should have at least 2 letters of recommendation that you can use at most schools, if not more, and take advantage of that. Even if you're going to have 2 professors write your letters, maybe have professors from different departments or that taught different styles of classes so that they can speak to different academic strengths of yours. But use a letter of recommendations for us to learn more about you, the complexities of you as a competitive individual for law school.
One of the types of letters of recommendation that we don't allow are going to be personal recommendations. So if you look on our website and you look at our instructions, we specifically note, please do not submit a personal letter of recommendation. So this is going to be letters of recommendation that are coming from people that have not supervised you or observed you in an academic or professional setting. That doesn't mean you could, for example, let's say you volunteered somewhere or you're part of an organization. Those types of recommendations are okay, right? Because it's somebody who has observed your professional competencies and has seen your quality and your character and can speak to that, but not, a family member or things like that. That's not what we're looking for. We really want to be able to, I guess, see and highlight the competencies and the characteristics and the values that you have and you have exhibited. Just by default, right, the recommendations are probably biased because you're going to choose somebody that you know well, hopefully. And so we still want to make sure that there's enough professional distance and rapport within the person that you select so that we can take those letters of recommendation seriously and really be able to see you through somebody else's eyes. Something that I think is created by the way that LSAC requests you to submit your letters of rec is that they want you to let your recommenders know that they have to create an account in LSAC, and then the recommender will write the letter and then submit it directly to LSAC, without submitting it to you. And that's done obviously to make sure that we can certify and verify that these letters of rec are coming from the right person. But I think what it does is it also makes applicants feel like they can't have a conversation with their recommenders. And that's not true at all. And in fact, a great letter of recommendation is going to come when you are able to ask for that recommendation letter appropriately, which means, asking that person if they have time to meet with you so that you can discuss the fact that you're applying to law school, you need a recommendation letter. This is why you think that they would be a great recommender for you. Figuring out if they're willing to write the recommendation letter. It's really crazy how many applications I see each year that include a letter of recommendation from somebody that says that this person should not go to law school. That only happens because you probably don't ask your recommender whether or not they could write you a positive recommendation. You just assume, right? So make sure that you ask and get their confirmation that they can and will write you a positive letter of recommendation, and then give them information about, I'm applying to Texas A&M School of Law. These are the things that they're looking for in an applicant. I've already submitted, this part of my personal statement and this on my resume. And so I really think that it would be great for you to highlight, my attention to detail or whatever it may be. You can have those conversations with your recommender and therefore give them more direction, which makes writing a letter of recommendation easier for them, but also it'll be more targeted and will serve you better.
I just want to say one last thing on letters of recommendation that you mentioned something that reminded me of it, is that we see a lot of students that I would describe it are reaching for a title in a letter of recommendation. Instead of someone that knows you, they're trying to find someone that's the president of their university or the CEO of an organization that they worked for. If that person knows you in detail, there's nothing wrong with that. But too often, we might get a letter of recommendation from a judge or a CEO or a president that frankly just doesn't know you, that doesn't give a whole lot of detail about you as a student, as an applicant, as an employee. And so just as a rule of thumb, don't reach for those if it's someone that doesn't know you. I would much rather read a letter from a staff member that supervised you directly or a professor that taught you directly than someone above them that was more removed from you. So just something that we see somewhat often. So moving from these documents to more of the strategy, this is a conversation that we just want to have briefly about, first off, kind of choosing law schools, but really succeeding in your goal. So I see your goal as not getting into a specific law school. We work with too many students that end up not going to law school because their goal was one law school. And what I mean by that is our admission rate on any given year is typically between 20 and 25%. And so if you choose a goal of, I fall in love with Texas A&M School of Law, which we love, we fall in love with the school too, and that is my goal now, is to become a law student there. It's a pretty hard goal to achieve sometimes. The real goal for you, if you're applying to law school, in my opinion, is to practice law, to serve someone, to serve a people through the practice of law. Or maybe more broadly, to use a JD degree to advance your professional career if you're not necessarily wanting to practice law. But you've got to succeed at that. And so going to law school is part of that. And you being admitted to school and going to a strong school where you feel like you'll be taught and prepared for not only the practice of law, but also passing a bar is very important. And so choosing where you apply to law school is really the beginning of all this. And having a good range of schools is a really good strategy to make sure you're successful at getting into school, but broaden that successful at that end goal. And so where should you apply is once again, a long conversation. We'd be happy to talk more with you about that. But one of the places that I would like for you to start is called the ABA 509 report. And so all law schools are required to submit this report. It's a very easy report to find for all of the schools that you're interested in. And there's a lot of data on that report, but one of the things I want to point out for you is the medians. And so medians are not everything. You're going to, and when I say medians, I'm talking about an LSAT median and a GPA median for an incoming class. So all law schools are going to have those numbers reported. And this is a way for you to get an understanding of what that most recent incoming class looked like. Medians are not minimums. You do not have to have both a LSAT and GPA median at that school to receive an offer. There's actually a very few number of students at any given law school that have both of that law school's medians. Typically a law school class, just because of how medians work, is something like 40% has the LSAT median but doesn't have the GPA median, 40% has the GPA median but not the LSAT median, and then 10% might have both, and 10% might be below both. And so first consider, maybe you don't have an official LSAT test yet, but what are your practice tests looking like, and where is your GPA at? So if you look at the list of schools you're interested in and you are above both medians of all of your schools, that probably means you're going to get a lot of admission offers and have some options, but it also might mean that you're not stretching yourself on what schools you should be considering. If all of your schools you're looking at, you're below, both of your numbers are below all of the medians, then you're going to have a really difficult time receiving an admission offer from those schools. We're all going to have holistic review processes, and we're going to get into review in a little bit. But just statistically speaking, this is a way to kind of, from the very beginning, consider what schools to be looking at. And so I I like to encourage students to consider applying to a range of schools. I do not encourage any student to only apply to one school. Some students might be geographically bound, and I understand that. Hopefully, if you're in a place like where A&M is in North Texas, there's a couple of schools in your area. But if you're passionate about becoming a lawyer and practicing law, then you might need to broaden your reach of where you're looking at for law school. And so where should you apply and how many schools should you apply to? I'm not going to give you a number of how many schools to apply to, but I like to see students applying to 3 or more schools and applying to a broad range of schools that are going to give you opportunities to get offers as well as considerations of scholarships, so that once we begin talking about making your decision here in a little bit, you'll actually have a harder time because you have a range of options to choose between.
So the one thing I'm going to say is that when I was applying to law schools, I wish I had the framework and mindset that I have now, having gone through law school and having the opportunity, for example, to take part in our professional identity program, in where we teach students to have a better self-reflective model in when they're making decisions. And so, it's really exciting to think about applying to law school and becoming a lawyer. And it's really easy to get caught up in what other people tell you that you should do and where you should go. And some people look at, rank, and some people look at, a bunch of things that we're going to discuss when we talk about researching your law schools. But before you do any of that, and before you get caught up in the swing of things, take a moment to sit with yourself and think about, who am I? What's important to me? What are my priorities? What are my goals? And write all that stuff down and go through it and talk to your family members about it and really shore up who you are and your identity. And then from there, go out and start doing all that research that we're going to talk about and thinking about what law schools you want to apply to, because it'll be much easier, first of all, to stay true to yourself and to be confident when you are looking at different options. And then also it'll help you create, the right types of questions and the right analytical framework to view what schools are offering you. So I wish I had had that advice before I got started, just to know myself a little bit better before getting into it, because it is really easy to get caught up in either what people tell you or what schools post on their website. And then once you don't have your true north or your guiding light to make those decisions, it can be really hard to make a decision that you're going to be happy with ultimately.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalia. So one of the things that I believe makes students successful at receiving offers from school and receive strong scholarship offers as well is when they make themselves known to law schools. We've hinted at this with the number of documents and different ways you can make yourself known through your admission documents. And so when, after I read all of your application documents, I should actually know a lot about you. And I should actually, be able to sit down with you and have a conversation and already have an understanding of maybe what your passions are and what your interests are. But beyond that, one recommendation I have for you is to make yourself known to law schools in other ways. And so if a law school that you're highly interested in sends you an invitation to an event, whether it's an in-person event or a virtual event this year, if you can attend that event, you should try your best to do so, and you should make it a priority. Whether or not you've been admitted to a school, whether or not you've applied to a school, if it's a school you're interested in, the opportunity for you to get to meet some of those staff members, faculty members at that school can be really helpful for you, for them to connect those documents with a person and maybe even ask you some follow-up questions. There's been many times that Natalia and I have been hosting an event that going into the event, we had specific people we were hoping to meet that day that we knew we had read their applications for and just wanted to get to know more. And so make yourself known. If they reach out and invite you to an event and you can attend that event, I would make those a priority. But also it is completely okay, and I recommend it, for you to reach out to schools. But you've got to be careful to not be unprofessional about it, to not become annoying about it. If you call someone's office, I know that voicemails are not really used by most students, by most peers, even professionally sometimes. If Natalia and I call each other on our work phones, I'm not necessarily going to leave her a voicemail. But if you're calling an admissions office phone and you don't get someone, leave a message and be prepared to leave a message that sounds professional. I can't tell you how many times we have someone that just calls over and over and over, and I can't answer the phone because I'm talking to you right now and I can't answer that phone. And so be prepared to present yourself professionally, whether it's on a phone call, whether it's on a virtual meeting. If you reach out and ask to speak with an admission staff member at a school and they invite you to meet with them virtually, I would be prepared to be on screen. Even if that's on your phone, that's okay. But think about what your surroundings are and think about how you're presenting yourself that day, and how you're prepared for that day. And so that kind of goes into, I'm going to kind of combine research with this, is to do your research and be prepared for those conversations. All too often we have students calling us, asking us the information that we worked very hard to put on our website to make available to students. And so make yourself known to those schools, but as you're having those interactions, prepare yourself by doing your own research. If there's simple yes and no questions, or just questions that the answer is a date or a process, do a little bit of research first to see if that's out there, so that the more times that admissions office interacts with you, the more times they are seeing you present yourself as professional and prepared, and someone that they would like to see in their law school.
So most of you will have, at some point in your application process, if you choose to apply to us, have contact with definitely me, most likely Jeff, and then absolutely one of our student workers or ambassadors. And I think sometimes in the application process, we forget that any contact with the school equals an opportunity for us to create basically have an impression of who you are and create your reputation. And so when you call the school, if you do get an answer, it might be one of our student workers. Yes, they're a student, but we chose them for a specific reason. And so the way that you interact with them, hopefully in a positive way, but a lot of times we have people that do not act in a positive way, that gets back to us. And I would say that I think both of us would be more upset hearing that an applicant was rude to our student workers than they are to us. Mm-hmm. And so really be mindful that, any email that you send, any phone call that you make, you are, no matter who you interact with, from student worker all the way to dean, it matters how you represent yourself. If you do a little bit of that research about us, you'll know that we have core values, and one of them is respect. We take that really seriously. And so, be thoughtful about those interactions, because we're gonna be tracking that. And you could have a great application, but you could have really terrible interactions with us, and that will offset a great application, because we have to think about, how are you going to interact with your classmates? How are you going to interact with your faculty members? How are you going to interact with your clients? And how are you going to represent being an Aggie lawyer? And so don't just think about, an interview or a Zoom call that's set up. Think about any of those other little interactions that you'll have throughout your application process.
Absolutely. This all relates to the last point here, is interviews. We do not have a required interview process for your application with us. Some schools still will require interviews. Some schools will only require interviews if you get invited to an interview. And so the first thing I want to say is that all of what we have said has applied to those formal interviews as well, is that you need to be prepared. You need to think about how you're presenting yourself. I'm assuming that year, if you have a formal interview with the law school, it's going to be virtual. Even before this season of COVID, a lot of schools were moving towards virtual interviews anyways. And so think of your surroundings, think of what interactions you can prevent during that time. But don't panic about those interviews. Do your research, know your school, know yourself, and be prepared to answer their questions truthfully and honestly, and with self-reflection, I think, is one of the biggest things that a lot of students don't prepare for, that Natalia hit on a while ago. For us, although we don't require interviews, what Natalia was getting at is what I'm going to say. Every interaction we have with you is an interview. Whether you're calling us, and you might not have ever thought about it before, but it might be the smallest thing, and you might be really frustrated because you're having problem getting a transcript to a school, or finding a very specific note about the process, a detail about the process. And so you're calling and you're frustrated, and you're just trying to get an answer, and maybe you don't get the answer you want. But even that little interaction can be really important with how you are going to exist and be as a student in law school one day. And so what I just like to prepare students for is every interaction you have with the law school, you need to be thinking of that as an interview, not just the formal ones, but also if we call you, it's not a bad idea not to memorize their numbers, but maybe to have an idea of what the area codes are of the law schools you're applying for. I can't tell you how many times a day and a week I call a student and they're annoyed because they're getting a call from an unknown number, and I get it. The number of unknown calls that we get these days is frustrating, but be prepared for that call to be with a law school representative and not just someone spamming your phone. And so my main point is that every interaction you have with a law school, even if they do formal interviews, all of the interactions you have with the law school is a time for them to interview you, is a time for them to reflect on who you are and who they are admitting to their law school.
So the flip side of that is that also, as you call law schools and you seek information from the law schools that you're applying to, you should also consider that you are interviewing them.
Mm-hmm.
So take stock in how you're treated when you call a law school, and who do they put you in contact with, and how easily is it to access information and connections with faculty or students or former students. Because a lot of times, as you're going through that application cycle and you're considering and you're weighing your options, it's easy to fall back into the kind of routine that I mentioned, looking at numbers, looking at rank. All of those things are really important, but how you were treated as an applicant is going to be likely a reflection of how you're going to be treated as a student. And so I know for me, it was really important, and I didn't realize it until I had an interaction with a school that I had very, high on my list of where I wanted to go, that I realized, oh, that's actually not how I want to be treated. So while we are interviewing you, you should also interview us and make sure that we are a good fit for you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, decisions. I know that seems kind of far away, especially if you're kind of at the beginning of the application cycle and you're thinking of just getting all of your stuff in and you're thinking about going to law school. But once you guys submit your application, then you're all about, when am I going to get a decision? So I want to give you kind of a broad view of what that looks like. Most law schools, and ours in particular, have what's called a rolling admissions, meaning that we open our application September 1, and then we accept applications all the way until our final deadline. Jeff mentioned that our final deadline is May 31st of next year for this cycle, and it's generally what that is. But as we mentioned, it's not really a deadline it's not a goal, right? You don't want to wait to submit your application until May 31st. And so as we have applications, we start to review them. And as we review them and we get a certain number of applications, a certain quality of applications, we will begin to determine a pattern of when we're going to be making decisions. And so each year we've had some early deadlines that become accessible to students, and each year they're different. We've not made a determination of what that looks like for this year, but when we do, we update our website and we send out emails, and we kind of, provide that information in lots of ways for you to know that there could be an opportunity to submit your application, complete it by a certain day, and then you will receive a decision by that time. If we don't have any of those, then generally speaking, you can expect anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks for us to review and make a decision at different points in the cycle. So it really just depends. Like Jeff said, there's a really busy part of our cycle where we have a lot of applications and we're going through a lot of decisions and we have less spots. So then the timeline for that might be longer. When we have less applications and more spots, that timeline might be shorter. And so it's probably the most annoying part of the application process for you as the applicant, to not really know when you're going to get a decision. But I would just urge you not to focus on that, to focus on completing your application, submitting it as early as you can, and then remaining in touch with us so we can update you. We welcome, emails and phone calls that ask about the status of your application. You can go online and check your status checker to see where you're at on that. But just know that it fluctuates a lot because it's a rolling admission, and because we have so many different points in the cycle where there's an influx of applications, and so that can stretch that timeline. But generally speaking, once we receive your application and it's reviewed, there are a couple of decisions that you can get. There's not just admit, deny. There's some that are in between. So we might receive your application and decide that we're going to waitlist you. We might receive something called deferred considerations. That's a little bit before we do waitlist. But any decision that you get will be updated in your portal. You'll be sent some communication via email or mail, and it'll explain what that decision is and what that means for you. And then, of course, if you get a decision and you're not sure, you can always call us and let us know. So the big takeaway there is going to be, it starts in September and can go all the way through May. The earlier and the more competitive your application, the better chance of an earlier decision. But all of those things kind of go out the window depending on how many applications we receive. In the last couple of years, each year we've had a record number of applications. So it's really hard, particularly for our office, to be able to tell you and set expectations for when we're going to make decisions, just because we don't even know, because we keep, we have no pattern. We just keep getting each year more and more applications. And so we try to work within that. But if you look at any of our posts and anything that students write about us, we try really hard to be upfront with you all about the timelines, transparent about where we are in your application process, and then as soon as we can get you those decisions, we do, and we update students at that time. Another kind of general date, right? So you have the September and the May is going to be sometime in April. Generally, April 1st is when most schools will have their first seat deposit requirement. So generally speaking, I would say if you've applied, in the normal time frame of by September, like from September all the way to the spring in February or March, you should have some form of a decision by that April timeline. And then once you're kind of past April, that's when it really becomes a little bit more complicated, because we have fewer seats. We generally have most of our class secured. And so April all the way till May and the end of the summer and into the semester is when some of those timelines get really kind of tricky if you're on the wait list.
So Natalia, I want to see if you agree with this next statement. I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, but if a student takes advantage of most of what we've said today and applies by, let's say, the end of the calendar year, they apply before January 1, and they apply to a range of schools, my expectations is they would at least have some decisions before March 1st, probably.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so that's just, I said earlier, the vast majority of students apply to law schools in the months of January and February, but the vast majority of law schools, if you were to lump all law schools together, no matter rank or anything, the majority of decisions go out in the months of January and February as well, because of that April 1st deadline that Natalia kind of referred to.
And really just the thing to keep in mind is that there are no set dates besides the opening and the closing of an application cycle. And so the only thing that you can do and that is in your control is to get your best application in front of us as soon as you can, and then, remain in contact with us. And we work probably too hard in reviewing and getting decisions out as timely as we can, because we want you to get your decision, and we want you to be able to look at other options, and we want you to make sure that what you have on the table before you're required to pay a seat deposit. So just remember to be patient, to check that portal, before calling us. And then if you've done all those things, you can go ahead and call us and we can give you an update.
Absolutely. So this last part here, gets more back to you making a decision, and that's a very challenging time for students. I think a lot of students aren't prepared for that as much. They work really hard on all these documents in this process, and they aren't expecting it to be as hard of a decision as it is. A lot of times you end up connecting with a school you didn't expect to, getting an offer from a school, whether it's just an admission offer or a scholarship offer from a school you didn't expect to. But my main piece of advice is just how we've talked about evaluating you, and Natalia can refer to this entire time, you should be evaluating your experience with the schools. And hopefully if you apply to that broad range of schools, hopefully this is a hard choice for you. Hopefully you do receive a number of offers and it is a hard choice. But the other thing I'll say is to include, those that are close to you in this decision and allow them to speak to what their thoughts are as well. And then, being prepared to pay that deposit, whether it's April 1st or around that timeline, but being prepared for that and to make that decision. Some students will put off making a decision by paying multiple deposits. It's definitely something you were able and welcome to do. I typically advise against it. I typically encourage students to try to make a decision so that you can begin the process of committing to that school personally, preparing to move, preparing to enroll, in all of those things that go along with starting law school.
Something that we haven't really touched on and is different among law schools is going to be scholarship offers. And what we do and what we try to do is that when you receive a decision from us, it will generally have your admission, if you are admitted, your admissions letter, your offer, and then with that, our scholarship offer, which we call tuition waivers. And we do that so that hopefully when you get the decision from us, you're able to have a clear view of what we are offering you, the whole package, and then be able to compare that across your other options and make your decision. This is where I think it goes back to that self-reflection. I think if you were able to sit down and write out all your priorities and what was important to you and all of that, and then you went through the process, somehow still, when you guys get to the decision process, all of that gets muddled again, because it is really exciting to be admitted. It's really exciting to get scholarship offers. And I think it's also really easy to lose sight of, how are you comparing schools? What are the parameters you're using? And then what's important to you? I think the only way to really make those decisions is going to be to get really great information from each school. So something that I, again, didn't do, I had done all of my research on the schools that I applied to, but just looking at their websites and looking at stats and rankings and all those things, but I wasn't really interacting with my schools. And so if you haven't done it in the beginning stages, right, when you're researching where to apply, you should definitely be doing it once you receive an offer. You should be reaching out to that admissions office, thank you for my offer. Now, who can you put me in touch with, right? Because that's what we love to do. Once you get your offer from us, if you haven't already, we're going to be bugging you, even if you don't ask us, but you should ask your schools. Let me talk to, faculty members in the practice areas that you're interested in. Let me talk to current students so I can ask them what their experience in law school is like and, what advice they have. Let me talk to former students to see what the employment process was for them and what the job market looks like and why they chose A&M. So really at that point, it becomes, your job and duty to really vet the schools and the decisions that you've received so you can get a really good sense of what your experience is going to look like. And I would say most importantly right now, that you can't come on campus and even if you did come on campus, you wouldn't really be able to get a good feel for your staff and your students because of all of the social distancing rules. So it's going to be even more important now than ever to really get a good feel for, beyond the rank and the stats and the dollar amount that's being offered to you, what is your day-to-day experience going to be like? Because if you ask anybody at any law school how much time you're going to spend in your law school career studying and working with your faculty and staff and students, it's an enormous amount of time. The percentage of the time that you spend in law school is going to be higher than what you spend with your family at home. And so I think it's really important to get a good feel for who you're committing to, because that's really what it comes down to, is the who and not the what. And so once you get all those decisions, even if you've forgotten all these things as you've gone through that exciting time, make sure you take a pause and ask these schools, you know, what are they offering, who you can talk to, because ultimately the reason you end up loving a school has very little to do with those stats and a lot more to do with the experience that you have and the way that you're treated while you're there. Ooh, this is a perfect segue, because, you know, we can sit here and tell you about why our school is great or what are the things you should be looking for, but I am a lawyer, right? So I believe in proving and evidence and showing me the facts. And our Instagram, I think, does a great job of that. We try really hard to highlight incoming students, current students, and former students on there, as well as programs and staff members and faculty members. And I think, you know, these direct quotes and these experiences that all of these members have at our law school can give you a really good feel for what you're committing to if you choose us. And beyond Instagram, we also have Facebook. Last year during the shutdown, we were able to get a ton of faculty members and students and former students to get interviewed and provide all of this Zoom content for you to look through and to listen to their perspective about, you know, why A&M is a great place to be. So I would highly encourage you to follow us, follow any of the schools that you're applying to, and get a feel for the atmosphere and culture of the school that you're planning to commit to.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are extremely open and invite you to reach out to us if you have other questions, or if you would like to schedule an appointment with one of our staff members in our office. We have an amazing team here, both of professional staff, as well as volunteer students, student workers. And so when you reach out to us, we've really built our office in a way that we now have more capabilities to respond to you than we have in the past. And so please reach out to us if you have questions, or if you would like to schedule an appointment with one of us. We'd be happy to share our availability with you and to see how we can serve you best. We have a passion in our office, not just for students that end up in our building, in our law school, but we have a passion just to help any students we interact with to become better law school applicants. So we hope this was helpful for you today. We hope that we get to interact with you one-on-one sometime, but best of luck, and we'll hope to speak to you soon.